Only the brave will watch till the end. Dare you enter? Because this is not just a story, it's a warning. Welcome to the house on Ashpine Road. It was a cold evening in late October when Daniel Carter first saw the house on Ashpine Road. The realtor's car slowed to a stop on the gravel drive, and through the mist that clung to the trees, Daniel caught sight of the silhouette. The mansion stood at the end of the long lane like a sleeping beast, its roofline jagged, its windows empty sockets staring at the road. Daniel had inherited the property after his aunt's passing, though he had never visited it before. He had only heard rumors, whispers from his mother when she thought he wasn't listening. The Ashpine house should have been left to rot, she'd once said, her voice low and sharp. Nothing good ever came from that place. But curiosity is a powerful force, and so Daniel had come. The car rolled to a halt in front of the iron gate, blackened with rust, its sharp tips resembling spears. It loomed over the driveway like a warning. When the realtor stepped out, fumbling with her papers, Daniel tried to push the gate. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder this time, but the iron didn't move an inch. The realtor frowned. That's odd. The caretaker told me it was unlocked. Daniel leaned in close. The heavy chain that bound the two halves of the gate together looked ancient, its links thick with corrosion, but there was no padlock. The chain simply held the gates shut, threaded through in a way that should have allowed them to slip apart with enough force. Yet when Daniel tugged again, the metal held firm. It was as though the chain wanted to stay that way. The realtor shifted uncomfortably. I'll call the caretaker. While she stepped aside, Daniel let his eyes wander. The forest pressed close on either side of the driveway. Trees nodded and gnarled, their branches curling like fingers. The evening mist wound its way through the trunks, making it hard to see more than a few yards. Somewhere, a crow croaked once, then went silent. Daniel placed his hand on the gate again. The iron felt colder than the air around it. His breath misted in front of him, yet the metal burned against his palm with an icy sting. And then he heard it, a faint sound, just beyond the gate. A whisper. Daniel froze. It was so soft he thought he might have imagined it. A thin voice carried through the mist. Just a few words, unintelligible, but urgent, like someone speaking quickly under their breath. He leaned forward, trying to catch it again. The mist shifted, curling along the ground like smoke. The whisper came once more, clearer this time. Don't open. Daniel's heart jumped. He pulled his hand away quickly, stumbling back from the gate. The voice vanished as suddenly as it had come. The realtor returned, oblivious to what he'd heard. Caretaker is on his way. He says the chain shouldn't even be there. Apparently, no one's touched this gate in decades. Daniel forced a nod, though his mind was still fixed on that voice. They waited in silence for a few minutes, the chill settling deeper into the air. Finally, a pickup truck rumbled down the lane, and a broad-shouldered man stepped out. He carried a toolbox, but when he saw the chain across the gate, he stopped short. His face drained of color. That wasn't here yesterday, the caretaker said slowly. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? The man didn't answer right away. He just approached the gate, running his hand over the chain. His expression was grim. This chain, it doesn't belong to the house. And believe me, son, if it's here now, someone wanted it here. With that, he pulled a heavy pair of bolt cutters from the truck. He slipped the blades around one of the links and pressed down hard. The cutters groaned, the chain resisted, far longer than it should have for such corroded metal. Finally, with a sharp crack, the link split apart. The sound echoed through the woods, loud and unnatural, as though the forest itself had been holding its breath. The caretaker pushed the gates open. They screeched on their hinges, protesting with a sound like a dying animal. The path ahead revealed itself, a long, straight drive vanishing into the mist, lined with skeletal trees. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. He looked back at the broken chain lying on the ground. The metal links shimmered faintly in the dim light, as if they weren't quite done moving. And for just a moment, Daniel swore he heard the whisper again, faint but insistent. "Turn back." He shivered. The caretaker slammed the gate wide, gesturing to the drive. "Well, let's get this over with." Daniel climbed back into the car, but as they rolled forward, passing through the threshold of the gate, a sudden weight pressed against him. Like stepping into a room where the air is too heavy, too thick. It wasn't just in his chest. It was in his head. His ears rang faintly and a chill settled down his spine. The car pressed onward. Behind them, the gate groaned as the wind shifted. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it creaked closed again until the two iron halves met with a heavy clang. The sound echoed through the forest, final and absolute. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. The gate was shut. The broken chain was gone. The drive to the house seemed endless. The gravel crunched under the tires, muffled by the damp mist that swallowed the world beyond the headlights. The forest pressed in close, so close that Daniel thought if he stretched his arm out the window, the skeletal branches might brush against his fingers. No birds called. No insects hummed. The silence of the woods felt unnatural, like a breath being held too long, and then at last the mansion came into view. It rose from the fog like a giant half buried in the earth, its peaked roof lines and broken chimneys stabbing at the pale sky. The facade was a patchwork of crumbling stone, weathered wood, and tall windows that gaped like hollow eyes. For a moment, Daniel felt something stir inside him, not fear, but recognition. A strange déjà vu, as though he had seen this house before, not in photographs, but in dreams. The caretaker pulled the truck in behind them, headlights cutting across the lawn that slipped away into shadow. He stepped out, his boots crunching gravel, and muttered under his breath. Daniel caught only a word: hungry. He wanted to ask what the man had meant, but before he could, the caretaker was already trudging toward the front door. The porch sagged under their weight, the old boards groaning. The caretaker produced a heavy brass key from his coat. It looked older than the house itself, green with tarnish. He forced it into the lock, twisted hard, and the bolt slid back with a sound like a groan. The door swung open. Cold air rushed out to meet them, stale and heavy, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Daniel stepped inside. The foyer was enormous, a high ceiling arched above, with a grand staircase winding upward into the gloom. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and the chandelier overhead was thick with dust. His footsteps echoed as though the house itself were hollow. The realtor, pale but determined, began her practice speech about historic value and restoration potential. Daniel only half listened. His eyes were drawn to the walls, cracked wallpaper, portraits with their faces eaten by mold, and doors leading deeper into the house. One door in particular caught his attention. It was at the end of the hall, partially hidden behind the staircase. Unlike the others, it was made of dark wood, smooth, without ornament or carving. No knobs, no keyholes. Just a plain door, tall and narrow, as though it had been placed there as an afterthought. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Something about that door was wrong. "Hey," he asked, pointing. "What's in there?" The caretaker's head snapped around. His expression darkened. "That room doesn't exist." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's no room behind that wall," the caretaker said firmly. "Blueprints don't show it. Never has been a room there." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He walked closer, each step echoing in the silent foyer. The wood looked too new. Not new like it had been built yesterday, but newer than the rest of the house, untouched by mold or dust. His reflection wavered faintly on the surface, though the room was too dark for such a thing. And then, as he stood before it, the air grew colder. His breath fogged the space between him and the wood. For just a moment, he thought he heard something from the other side. A soft sound, a shuffle, like someone moving in the dark. He turned quickly to the caretaker. "Did you hear that?" The man's face was pale. "Leave it alone." Daniel raised a hand and pressed it against the door. The wood pulsed faintly beneath his palm, not like a vibration, not like machinery. It was a heartbeat, slow, steady. His stomach turned. The caretaker strode forward, yanking Daniel back. I said, "Leave it." The realtor, visibly unsettled now, cleared her throat nervously. "Maybe we should move on. Show him the rest of the property." But Daniel couldn't look away. Something about the door pulled at him. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff. You know, the drop will kill you, but some part of you aches to lean forward, to see what would happen if you fell. Finally, the caretaker gripped Daniel's arm hard. His voice was low, harsh, desperate. "There are places in this house where the walls don't belong to us. You don't open what doesn't want to be opened." Daniel swallowed, nodding, though his mind was still fixed on the strange pulse he had felt. They left the foyer, moving into the rest of the house. The realtor prattled about dining rooms and parlors. Daniel trailed silently, but his thoughts never left the hidden door. Later, as they ascended the staircase to the second floor, Daniel paused. He looked down into the shadowed foyer below. The door was still there, only now it was slightly ajar. A faint black line of darkness cut through the wood, wide enough for something to slip through. And Daniel could have sworn he saw the edge of a pale hand slide back into the gap before the door closed again. His blood ran cold. The caretaker muttered a prayer under his breath and gripped the railing so hard his knuckles went white. The realtor didn't notice, but Daniel did. He couldn't unsee it. And deep inside, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That door hadn't been unlocked by him. It had unlocked itself. The night in Hollowmore stretched on endlessly. Daniel lay awake in the guest room the realtor had insisted was the least drafty. The fire in the small hearth had long since gone out, leaving the air bitterly cold. He had pulled the blankets tight around him, but it wasn't the chill that kept him from sleep. It was the silence. Most old houses had their language, the creak of timber, the sigh of pipes, the shifting groan of the foundation. But Hollowmore spoke differently. The quiet was heavy, pressing, alive. It was as though the house itself was listening, holding its breath, waiting for something. Daniel's thoughts turned again and again to the strange door under the stairs. The caretaker had warned him, and the look in his eyes had not been performance. That had been fear, raw, instinctive fear. And yet, Daniel could not stop thinking about the faint movement, that pale hand retreating into the dark as the door shut. Finally, near midnight, the silence broke. At first it was faint, a sound just at the edge of hearing, drifting up through the floorboards. Daniel sat up slowly, heart pounding. It was a whisper, not a single voice, but many. A chorus, soft and frantic, threading together like the rustle of dry leaves. He pressed his ear to the wall. The sound was coming from beneath him, from the basement. He tried to tell himself he was imagining it, but the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Distinct syllables rose out of the tangle of whispers, though they never formed words he could recognize. It was like listening to a language spoken underwater. Still, one phrase repeated again and again. He could feel it as much as hear it. "Let us in." Daniel's mouth went dry. He grabbed the flashlight he had unpacked earlier and crept from the room. The hall was dark, shadows pooling at the edges where the dim moonlight failed to reach. The whispering grew louder as he descended the grand staircase. By the time he reached the foyer, it was undeniable. The voices were coming from behind the door at the base of the stairs, the door that didn't he exist. His flashlight beam trembled against the wood. He should go back, he thought, return to bed. Pretend none of this was happening, but his legs carried him forward. He pressed his hand against the door. Again, it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. This time, however, the wood was warm, almost feverish. Daniel took a step back, and the door opened on its own. A seam of darkness split the frame, yawning wider until the gap revealed a narrow staircase spiraling downward into pitch black. The air that poured out smelled of damp stone and rust. The whispering swelled, filling his ears until it seemed to crawl into his head, his chest, his very bones. He should run. He knew it. Every instinct screamed it. Instead, he stepped inside. The air grew colder with each stare. His flashlight cut through the dark in a trembling cone, catching glimpses of stone walls slick with moisture, strange symbols carved deep into the mortar, and shadows that seemed to bend away from the light. The whispering didn't fade as he descended. It grew louder, more urgent. The voices overlapped, clawing for his attention. Some hissed, some sobbed, some laughed in a high, brittle pitch that made his skin crawl. And yet, beneath the chaos, one voice began to rise above the rest. Clear, low, male. Daniel. He froze. The beam of his flashlight shook violently now. The whispering voices fell away, all at once, leaving only the one. Daniel. The next morning arrived as if the night had never happened. Daniel woke in his bed, drenched in cold sweat. His flashlight lay on the nightstand where he had left it before going to sleep. His shoes were neatly placed by the door. The window was closed tight. Had he dreamed it all? No, his palms still burned from slamming against stone. And when he lifted the blankets, he found dirt and torn grass clinging to his clothes. He had been outside. He had been in the basement, and something had followed him. All morning, Hollowmore's silence seemed heavier, as though the house itself was sulking, brooding. Daniel tried to keep himself busy, unpacking his things and avoiding the caretaker's disapproving gaze. But no matter where he went, his eyes were drawn again and again to the massive grandfather clock that stood in the great hall. It was beautiful, dark oak carved with twisting vines, golden weights polished to a dull glow, and a pendulum that hung like a brass harp. The glass was flawless, gleaming in the gray daylight, but the clock never ticked. The caretaker noticed him staring. His face went ashen. "Don't touch it," he warned. Daniel frowned. "It's broken?" The caretaker's mouth tightened. "No, it's not broken. It simply doesn't move." "Why not?" The old man's eyes darted to the clock, then away. "Because it is waiting." Daniel almost laughed, but the look in the caretaker's face stole away any trace of humor. When the caretaker left to tend the garden, Daniel approached the clock. The silence in the hall deepened with every step. Even the birds outside had gone still. Up close, the clock was more imposing than he had realized. He pressed his hand against the glass, half expecting the pendulum to start swinging. Nothing happened. But then, faintly, from deep inside the mechanism, came a sound. Tick. Just once, Daniel froze. The pendulum had not moved, but the sound had been real. He leaned closer. His breath fogged the glass. Tick, another, then silence. Daniel's heart raced. He reached for the door to the clock, but before his fingers touched it, the caretaker's voice rang out sharply. "I told you not to." Daniel jerked his hand back. The caretaker stormed across the hall, his face pale with fear. He gripped Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," he hissed. "Every time it ticks, the house remembers." "The house remembers what?" Daniel whispered. The caretaker's grip tightened. "It's dead." The words lodged like ice in Daniel's chest. That night, Daniel couldn't stay away. The whispers in his head pulled him back to the great hall. He stood before the clock once more, his flashlight beam trembling. It was midnight. The house was silent. And then it began. Tick, tick. The pendulum swung. Slowly at first, then stronger. The golden weights shifted, The gears groaned. After years of silence, the clock had awakened. And with every tick, the house changed. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, curling like smoke. The air grew colder, pressing against Daniel's lungs. From the staircase above, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Coming down, though, no one was there. Tick. The portraits lining the walls began to weep black tears, the paint itself running down their faces. Tick. The whispering returned, louder than before, seeping from the cracks in the walls. They didn't speak nonsense this time. They spoke his name, over and over, 1,000 voices in unison. Daniel. Tick. He stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight. He wanted to run, but the clock's sound pinned him in place. His legs felt heavy, chained by something unseen. Tick. The glass of the clock fogged from within, as if something inside was breathing against it. Slowly, a handprint appeared on the glass, pale, long-fingered, pressing outward. Daniel's chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. Then, with a deafening chime, the clock struck once, not 12, not one, just once. The sound shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. The portraits screamed, their painted mouths stretching wider than any human face should. And the hand behind the glass dragged downward, leaving streaks like blood. Then, silence. The pendulum stopped. The weights froze. The whispers fell quiet. Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His flashlight rolled across the floor, the beam cutting through the stillness. The caretaker appeared in the doorway, his face grave. He looked at Daniel, then at the clock. His voice was low, trembling. It has begun. Daniel's throat was dry. What has? The caretaker's eyes glistened with fear. The clock only ticks when the dead are near, and now. He swallowed hard. They're awake. The clock gave one last faint sound. Tick. Daniel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the ticking. Even though the grandfather clock had fallen silent, the sound still echoed in his skull. Slow, deliberate, dragging him deeper into terror. By morning, the caretaker was gone. No note, no explanation. Daniel searched the grounds, the stables, even the overgrown greenhouse, but there was no sign of the old man. It was as if Hollowmore had swallowed him whole. Alone again, Daniel's thoughts circled back to the clock. Its last toll still haunted him. When the dead are near, the caretaker had said. And Daniel believed him. That evening, while wandering the west wing of the house, Daniel discovered a narrow corridor he had somehow missed before. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, exposing rotting wood beneath. A draft carried the faint smell of damp earth. At the end of the corridor stood a door. It was unlike the others in the house, made of blackened wood, its surface carved with intricate symbols Daniel couldn't recognize. His flashlight trembled as he touched the knob. The door opened without a sound. Beyond it was not another bedroom, not another hallway. Instead, Daniel found himself standing in a vast, dimly lit chamber. The air was heavy, pressing down on his chest like unseen hands. And all around him were doors. Dozens, hundreds. The walls stretched impossibly far in every direction, curving upward into shadows. Each door was different. Tall, short, elegant, crude, ancient, modern. Some were rotting barn doors, others gilded like palace gates. One was nothing more than iron bars, another painted blood red. They formed an endless labyrinth. Daniel's voice cracked in the silence. What is this place? The moment he spoke, the doors answered, not with words, but with sound. Behind one, a baby's cry. Behind another, the slow dragging of chains. From another, laughter, hollow, cruel, echoing. And from somewhere far down the chamber, a woman's voice whispered his name, Daniel. His blood froze. He stepped back, but the door behind him, the one he had entered through, was gone. In its place stood another, this one covered in deep claw marks. He was trapped. Daniel forced himself to breathe. He told himself it had to be a trick, a hallucination, maybe the house playing with his mind. But the weight of the air, the pounding of his heart, the way his skin crawled, told him this was no dream. There was only one choice. He had to pick a door. His flashlight beam swept across the endless row. He paused at a tall iron door, its handle twisted like a serpent. From behind it came the faint sound of sobbing. A woman sobbing. He swallowed hard and reached for the handle. The metal burned his skin. He yanked his hand back with a cry, staring at the angry red mark spreading across his palm. The sobbing behind the door turned into laughter, mocking, sharp. Daniel staggered away, panic rising. He ran down the row, doors stretching endlessly in both directions. His footsteps echoed as though the chamber itself were hollow. He tried one door, then another, but each was locked tight, and then he saw it. Far down the endless hall of doors, one stood slightly ajar. A thin strip of light spilled out from the crack, cutting through the gloom. Against every instinct, Daniel walked toward it. The closer he came, the louder the whispers grew. They crawled across the walls, slithering in his ears. Some begged him to enter, others warned him to turn back. But all spoke at once, their overlapping voices nearly driving him mad. He reached the door. The light seeping from inside was warm, golden, almost inviting. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw the shape of his sister standing within, her smile soft, her hand reaching out to him. His heart ached. She had died years ago. He touched the door, and it slammed open. The golden light vanished, replaced by a swirling void of darkness. A force like a hurricane pulled at him, dragging him forward. He screamed, clawing at the floor, but the pull was too strong. The chamber spun, the doors rattling violently as if in laughter. The last thing he saw before the void consumed him was his reflection in the door as surface, except it wasn't to his. The face staring back was pale, hollow-eyed, its mouth stretched in a silent scream. Then everything went black. Daniel woke on the floor of his bedroom. His flashlight lay beside him, its beams still faintly glowing. For a moment he thought it had been another nightmare, but when he looked at his palm, he saw the burn, the exact shape of the iron serpent handle he had touched. And from down the hall, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a door slowly creaking open. The air outside the ruined mansion was colder than the night before. The trees swayed without wind, their skeletal branches scratching against the starless sky. Emma stumbled out of the house, her clothes torn, her breath ragged, and her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, the cursed structure groaned like a dying beast. The endless doors, the whispering pipes, the silent clock, all of it felt alive, angry, and unwilling to let go. But Emma had escaped, or at least she thought she had. As she stood at the rusted locked gate of Ashpine Road, dawn began to rise, painting the horizon with pale streaks of gray. She reached for the padlock that had once barred her entry, but to her surprise, it hung open, as if the house had finally released her. For the first time since stepping inside, Emma allowed herself to breathe, but then the ground trembled. She turned back. The mansion stood tall and defiant, but now every window was filled with faces, pale, glassy-eyed children. The Ashen Bride, the woman from the attic. All the phantoms she had seen, and some she had not, stared silently out at her, watching, waiting, and in the very center window, high above, a shadow stood wearing the crimson mask she had once seen in her dreams. It raised its hand slowly and pressed it to the glass. Emma froze. Her own chest burned, her skin crawled, and then she realized her reflection was not moving with her. In the faint shimmer of the glass, she saw herself standing inside the house, behind the window. The May outside the gate was nothing more than a husk and echo, while the real her had been claimed. The gate creaked shut with a metallic clang. Ashpine Road was silent once more. Only the house remained, waiting, breathing, and its doors endless, hungry, were never truly closed.